Okay, so hi, welcome to in a wellness talk series, and I have a special guest, the very first special guest, Dr. Stephen Murphy-Shigematsu. I'm calling him Stephen-san, so I want to call him Stephen-san. So Stephen-san, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so
Happy.
Stevenson is in Japan right now, and I'm in California. So we have like a talk, crossing the countries. But I'm so happy to talk to you today.
It looks like I'm in California from the fake background, but
Yes, I see your background.
I'll have to, I'll have to change that so that it really reflects where I am, which is in Tokyo right now.
Yes. Okay. So, before we talk about wellness and this, so I'm really interested in talking about heartfulness as well. But let me introduce about Stephen. So, Stephen is an American Japanese psychologist at the Stanford University, where he explores human development through mindfulness, Asian wisdom, science, compassion, and responsibility. So, as a professor, speaker, and thought leader, and author, Stephen inspires personal growth and well being. And Stephen earned his doctorate in clinical and community psychology from Harvard University, and he has served as a professor at the University of Tokyo. And he is also recognized as the author of From Mindfulness to Heartfulness. So thank you so much, and Stevenson. I think everybody wants to know about you a little bit more. So can you share with us about your career journey and your life experience, how you have been working with diverse clients and communities?
Well, Manami, that the answer to that question gets longer and longer as I keep living longer and longer.
Yes.
And but I think of a saying from Mark Twain, who wrote a letter to his friend, and he said, I wanted to write a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. And I thought that a good way of saying that, our story can get very long, but there's also a way in which I feel like my story is getting shorter and shorter, and that it becomes clearer and clearer in some sense. And I think that's one of the, for me, unexpected gifts of aging is that some things just seem very clear and simple in a way that they have didn't appear when I was younger. Um, and I think if I think about my career, it's in very simply, I think when I was young, I was told by my parents and other older ancestors that I had ability and therefore I had responsibility to do something for of service to people. And so even I think from the age of about 15, I started working in hospitals and nursing care facilities for older people. And um, I think that was part of felt a sense of destiny about my career. And I think the second thing that happened was when I was in my 20s and I survived a fire that burned my house down while I was in it and escaped from that fire. I think I felt like it was good to feel that I had a destiny in life and there was something for me to do. Um, and then I got this image of the Nichibei no Kakehashi, so that from the circumstances of my birth, which were both a Japanese mother and an American father, born in Tokyo after a war in which they were killing each other, um, that perhaps that could be I could find meaning in believing that I had a destiny to somehow do something that would be a bridge between these two cultures and countries and peoples. And I think from that time, that has been how my career has developed, is in those two ways of how to be a bridge in some way, and in particular, using the kinds of abilities that I had um, as somebody who wanted to be of helping other people, of service to other people, of service to communities, and And so I think since then it's been a very simple. I spent a lot of time in the US earlier in my career. Then I spent a lot of time in Japan. The next phase of my career, now I've spent a lot of time back in the US. And I'm at the moment now of what I think is the final transition of my career to working more focused in Japan.
Well, thank you so much. Like, I know, like, know you since like 2011 and 14 years, but I know like you have a lot of story to share, but it's kind of surprising, like you think, your life is getting like a simpler. And then, so yes, I really see you actually like, bridging like between Japan and the US, and then now like really helping the people in Japan. You're still helping all the people in US, but like I see like you helping like both people. So yeah, I really see that. Right, thank you. And then, like I really interesting about heartfulness. I have been asking you about what is heartfulness, and then so I joining your talk and then learning from your book. I actually have your book here, so yes.
Mhm.
I have your signature too. Yeah, but but like what is the hurtfulness? So I think people really interested in hurtfulness, and sometimes maybe you receive a lot of questions. So what's the difference between mindfulness and hurtfulness? Because you kind of talk about that transformation from mindfulness to hurtfulness.
Yeah, I think that has been a big transition for me in terms of my, I think going back sometime in maybe 15 years ago, I started to teach courses at the university using the word mindfulness.
Mhm.
And then I also started to force all my students to meditate. And so we began, fortunately, at Stanford, there is a beautiful meditation center right next to my classroom. And I would take all the students to the meditation center and require them to meditate. And then gradually, over many years of working with many kinds of diverse students, many of them started to tell me that they didn't want to go to the meditation center, or that they
Mhm.
went and they felt some kind of like a trigger of a trauma, like of the smell of the center, or the inability to sit right next to somebody else because it would get crowded, and to be able to close their eyes and to get into a meditative state was very difficult for them. And so I started to feel like my focus on meditation was not necessarily the right one for everyone. And the reality is that one of the first books on mindfulness that came out of the academic world by Ellen Langer at Harvard was uh, I was told initially it was going to be called mindlessness. And it was because she was a person who'd never meditated, and her whole concept of mindfulness was very different from the kind of mindfulness that had come out of the meditative tradition promoted by John Kabat-Zinn and others. And so I started to feel that maybe the mindfulness concept that I had was not fitting with everyone. And I also started to reflect on Japanese culture and the influence of particularly my grandmother, who I lived with for a while, and the idea or the concept of kokoro, which, as you know, has a very much broader meaning than an English sense of what is the mind. And of course, we know that we think of the mind more as up here in our brains, but when Japanese and some other people in Asia refer to the self, they will point often to the heart. And so there's a much more, I think, my sense of mindfulness, I realized, was more based in a broader concept of kokoro, which would indicate kind of beyond the mind, the body and the spirit, and that was what I wanted to capture because of my sense that what an American form of mindfulness was not fitting with what I was wanted to share, what I was experiencing myself, and wanted to share with others. Um, and so I felt that it was I wanted people to do more than just go inward and have an inner reflection, with the belief that if we do that, then it also brings us outward. And if we go outward, then that brings us to other levels of compassion and responsibility. And I think that's what, we see that in the work of like Suzuki Shunryu, who says that the beginner's mind is the mind of compassion. And that if we can really center ourselves and enter our inner world and be mindful, then that naturally brings us outward to a sense of compassion. And that's what many of my students would say is that they're very, when they first go inward and meditate, then they feel like they're inside themselves and they can see themselves more clearly. But what surprises them, and that's not surprising in a sense that that's what they're expecting, but what surprises them is that when they open their eyes and they look at others, they say, I see others in a very different way. And I feel like I see others with clarity and I see beyond this sense of separation and boundaries. And I feel connected, which is what to me is compassion. They feel the connection with the other person in a very human way. And then I think that then motivates them also to feel some sense of service and responsibility that if they really are connected to others, then they want to express that through their behaviors and through their actions. And so I started to frame heartfulness as including both not just mindfulness in the sense of inward reflection, but also compassion and responsibility in the sense of taking that inward reflection, the benefits of that, are into the world in a way that you express that with with other people, but also in your particular communities.
Yes. So, when I learn about like heartfulness from you, so I kind of have a sense like a more loving, compassion, kindness, and a connection, not just with yourself, with others as well. And it's very different from mindfulness. Like to me, mindfulness is more neutral being. And it's a really great practice. But as you said, like I have seen like so many people struggle to be mindful because of like many reasons. But I think I feel heartfulness is kind of like a beyond the mind, like a more next stage, like a having the connection with the self and with others, and it's really like a great the people can learn how to connect with the self with others because this is the thing a lot of people really struggle these days.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and as you know, in Japan too, I've trying to move from using the word mindfulness to heartfulness because when I say mindfulness in Japan, people say, but believe it equals meditation.
Ah, yes, yes.
Want to, and therefore they often dismiss it and say, "Oh, I can't do that. It's too hard and takes too much time." And I want to instead say that mindfulness is something that is more a way of being, a way of living. It's a consciousness that also we express in our daily activities rather than something that in which we remove ourselves, which is often the image of meditation, is that you remove yourself and you focus completely on yourself. And if it, to me, that's if it stops there, then it has very limited benefit both to the individual but also to the society. And so I'm trying to create this brand in the sense of this word that is, I hope, creates more of um, the image of mindfulness as something that takes us into the world, in the sense that I described before. We go inward as a way of coming outward as well.
I see. Like a heartfulness. need more like a deeper relationship with self, and it's, going to connection with others as well. So like, both of us really focus on inner wellness because we believe like real wellness starts from within, inside, not like, the treatment from the outside. So how, like, you think those deeper relationships through heartfulness, like, help the people's well-being, and how, like, they can kind of shape, like, a new type of true wellness through the heartfulness practice?
Hmm. I think that so the as you might know, I was a psychotherapist for about 20 years, and that was mostly in communities in Boston with kind of a large Black neighborhood there. And then in San Francisco, I did some work more in Asian American communities. And then in Japan, I was also working in different communities through both in Okinawa, but also in Tokyo at different colleges and often with people from other cultures as well. But I've transitioned when I went to Stanford to what I considered to be a kind of psychoeducation. And that means to me that I was using my clinical knowledge and experience in a more conventional educational context. So, in other words, I created courses that students could take for credits, um, and that those courses would be a place of transformation, and that so that in this small group context, somewhat similar to an encounter group in some ways, but fitting within the system, which required a certain type of educational content as well. Um, that I created this kind of learning, healing environment that I then practiced for at least maybe 15 years with many students. And I feel like that's the one contribution that I can make is that I did that so many times in a very similar kind of way and used it as a way of research in the sense of uh, evaluating, reflecting, recording, examining what I did and how that affected students, and then revising it or refining it so that it was able to deal with the incredible diversity of people who were taking those types of classes. And so that's something that I have experienced is how first for maybe 20 years, how people can transform themselves through the intensity of a one-to-one relationship in counseling or therapy. And then for about 20 years now of experiencing how people can also transform in a particular small group setting in which I think there's also a lot of power that is missing from the one-to-one relationship in the sense that they have the opportunity to practice what they are learning in that moment uh, because there are all these other people in that same context, and so they get to put into practice something like often in individual psychotherapy we create their awareness and then we ask them to go out. Okay, now go and do this with somebody else and go into society, into your community, into your family. And I feel like the small group offers the opportunity to actually practice it in that moment with others, and that there's this beautiful sense of organically giving and receiving. And they realize that they're benefiting in both ways, both from receiving from others, but also in giving to others as they are able to be more vulnerable and authentic in in that particular context. And so that's the one thing I feel like I have done for many years that I have seen is very transformative for participants.
Oh, I see. You kind of like mentioned about you really offering this space for transformation and not like, academic, like, study. It's more like the space for practice that transformation and it kind of spreading that, like, community, like a beyond the beer. So I think this is a very special, like, when we think about the education, okay, so we, study at the, the school and then like learning in the brain, but it's more experiential and it kind of people really can feel the transformation inside and they kind of like sharing that to the bigger group in the future. So
Yeah.
that's really fascinating.
And I think it's helped me to be in a university because otherwise I think I may have gone very extreme in that sense of just we don't need to read books or we don't need to.
Yes, it's a framework. We need some.
Yeah, and so the school has, continually pushed back at me when I said, let's offer these experiential courses. And they say, are the courses rigorous? And I would push back at them and say, well, rigor, from the Latin means to be rigid and like rigor mortis means that the stiffness of a dead body, right? And so I said, I don't want my courses to be rigorous, but I want them to be vigorous in the sense of a lot of people helping students to come alive. But and so I've the university has been helpful in the sense of reminding me that there is also value in that in learning that we can do. And I always give students reading of different kinds, including the type that the university really respects, which are the evidence-based, journal articles. And I think it's important to know those too, that and to know that there are life is not just our own individual experience, but that individual experience can include many different things and many different kinds of learning, and some of those are taught at the university, but many of them are not. And that's the other thing is I want to both bring people into the university who have a different type of knowledge that the university doesn't respect, but also to bring students outside the university too, to bring them to places where they can meet people who are not, so highly uh, educated by the system, like people like us who have lots of formal education. But we know that if we can just let go of our egos, that there are so many people outside the universities who know, so many things that we don't know. And I really want my students to be to learn from them as well. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I joined your class like in the past, and one time, and I could, yeah, I saw like your classes are very like creative and flexible, and I can imagine like you providing that kind of like a holistic learning. So I really like, university and then, like, professors like providing that kind of holistic learning to very diverse people. So, and a connection with the outside too. So, you invite me to your class and then, so this is kind of like a connection with the outside world as well. So I kind of really like, that kind of like, holistic learning.
Um, but I've also felt the restrictions of the university as the context for that. And the university has made it very clear that the well-being and transformation of students is not their priority. So
Really? Okay.
priority, priority of some place like a Stanford University is Stanford University. The justification of its elite status, and the perpetuation of that elite status is the primary objective or of the university. And so what I've done, they've made very clear is important, but it's not a priority.
Mm.
And that it fits very difficult. It's very difficult to fit within a university system, which really does not value kokoro, right? Does not really value love as the highest value in life. And that's always been difficult because that is my highest value. And but I've worked within a system that does not value that in the same that I do. And so I've I have been in there for many years, but I also want to now take that outside of the university to contexts in which there may be more openness to do that. And there, I think I'm finding that in Japan there are a lot of different contexts that are open to doing that, including companies and very large companies like the company Kyocera, which many Americans don't know as well because it doesn't. They often don't have their own products, but they produce things for other products like the iPhone. They have parts in the iPhone, but it's a very large international company which has the motto is K10 Hygiene, which means to honor God and to love people. And so I found that there are sincere companies in Japan who really believe that the importance of well-being for their own companies, the employees, but also realizing that that is something that is can affect the well-being of whole communities of people. And so I've been very encouraged to do that kind of work in Japan in places which I didn't expect that they would be open to that. Mm.
I think both of us kind of go to the place has more openness to, work with us, and it's very interesting because like when I'm working, with the very diverse like communities, especially underserved communities in the U.S. So there are also, some communities are very closed off, but at the same time they are very open to something new because they kind of learn like a traditional mental health support system doesn't really work for their communities. So
Mm.
yeah, kind of like a picking up like a little, the openness in there. It's still like, very like, small, but so I kind of see that kind of openness in the community in the US as well. And hopefully like we can exchange like, some idea or like how they, can work with us and how they can improve their mental wellness. So hopefully, like, we can exchange those like experience and knowledge like across the countries. So that's kind of, I'm hoping for the
Mm.
future.
Even so, for me, even working in an elite institution like Stanford University is, I have worked mostly with those in the community who feel that they are marginalized or that they are not. Um, they heard the word diversity and inclusion, but they felt that they were able to enter into the Stanford community, but were not really included or were not seen as equal members of that community, and they were expected to adapt or conform to this old Stanford culture rather than to really bring themselves into that culture. And so, even within an institution like this, I feel like I have been working mostly with those who feel that they are disadvantaged in some way or not privileged in the same way as others. And but that's something I've tried to do in my throughout my career. I worked for about 8 years with the U.S. military, Marines, and the Navy. And it was in that context that they often asked me to work with those who were feeling that they were marginalized by the system. And so in Japan, I worked with often with the Japanese employees who were feeling that they were not. The managers were always the Americans, but that the workers were the Japanese. And so I worked with Japanese employees with things like how to um, feel more empowered and how to assert themselves better within the limitations of that system.
I see. So maybe like we can change the gear a little bit right now. So we really focus on inner wellness, like a true well-being inside. And like I'm encouraging my clients and communities like more inner nurturing. So
Yeah.
and then, so I think about you because you are the, one of the people like I know, like you have a very great inner nurturing voice. And then through the nurturing voice, you're talking to yourself and talking to others. And I'm
Mm.
wondering, like, is it very natural for you since you are young, or you kind of develop that nurturing voice to yourself, to others through your work experience, life experience?
Hmm. That's a good question.
Very
My
curious.
my grandmother told me that I was such a quiet baby that the neighbor would come over every once in a while and said, "Is that baby still here?" I never hear the baby crying. And I think I was that kind of a child. I seemed like I was already kind of an old man when I was just a little boy. And I think I was just had a kind of natural mindfulness to my way of living. And I think that it was I think it somehow nurtured me as a child, and then of course I had the difficulties of being a teenager, which made. But even then, I was drawn to learning more. So from the time I could do it in college, I started to do yoga and meditation and Aikido, and I was drawn to many forms of self-care. Um, and then I think maybe the influence after that was when I decided on pursuing a the career in counseling that I noticed that a lot of my classmates had the expectation that they were going to be able to talk a lot and give a lot of advice because they were smarter because they had studied about it and they had all this knowledge to give to the clients. Um, but my mentors that I encountered in the counseling program were helped me to realize that it wasn't the certain techniques or even skills in a sense. It was the development of my own character that was the most important thing. In other words, that I would be the most powerful influence of in therapy was my ability to be with the client and not to abandon the client because of my own needs, but my ability to be there and to be present with the person, and how that meant that I had to be transforming myself as a human being to develop that ability, and that was more important than any kinds of skills that I could learn or techniques or methods or now that was, I think, very influential for me to believe that I had to keep constantly developing myself and transforming myself, um, and that has become a uh, I think a constant motivation for me in my work.
I see. So I think many people really agree, like they kind of want to be well from the inside, really well, the true
Mm.
well-being. But sometimes people really struggle how to be, how they can be, as based on your experience, so you could, have a chance to feel and experience the moment, the transformation inside of you. But like many people, especially underserved people, underserved population, so they don't have that time, they don't have that opportunity sometimes. So how like a people can do that kind of transformation, even like a people don't have a lot of opportunity to feel, experience, but how they can do like a transformation?
Yeah, um, I don't know. It's my
Yes, that's a big mystery, and I kind of try to learn from you, but
I
yeah.
know that's the um, I said that somewhat, glibly, but I think I really do believe it in the sense that I do not know how someone else can transform themselves. I have seen myself do something which I consider a transformation. I've seen many other people do it, but I don't have any confidence that I can tell anyone else this is how you do it, and that there's a formula for doing that. Um, but I do feel like I would more and more if people ask, like you're asking me now, I feel like I want to share something that I have, experienced myself. And I know that one thing that has been very helpful for me is to have a consciousness of death, and this comes, from that. I think early in life, I was exposed to the Catholic religion, and so I went to Catholic school, Catholic church. For many years, I learned Latin to how to sing with the priest in Latin. Uh, and as you know, the central figure of the Catholic Church is the crucifix, which shows a dying Jesus on a cross being tortured to death. And that's the central figure that you learn. And as a child, that's, quite impressive and terrifying in some ways. But the message I believe that they're giving you is also expressed in the Latin expression memento mori, which strangely has become a game in Japan, and which memento means, of course, to remember, and morti means death. And so it's the sense of simply means remember you die. And this resonates, of course, in Japanese culture with the Bushido uh, culture of remembering daily that you are dying, that you are part of nature, and that you will die, and therefore remembering that you're dying is a way to be alive and to be more fully alive by saying, I realize I have a limited time, I have a limited life, I am a mortal being. This body is constantly dying, and some people don't like to think this way because they believe it's more depressing. But I found that for myself and for many others, that this kind of a reminder, a daily reminder, can be the way that we actually come alive more. And that's, I think, something that even, you see like in popular culture, something like the film Barbie, in which Barbie starts to realize that she is a mortal being. She doesn't want to be, she could be a doll if she wants to be, but she decides that she wants to actually live. And part of living is that sense of death consciousness. So she shocks everybody at the dance party and says, hey, did you guys ever think about dying? And everybody's like horrified, like, oh my God, what a taboo. Don't ever talk about that. But that is the way that she transforms her life, right? From being this doll that has no, is just determined, her life is determined by others, into this very asserting, very powerfully, I want to be alive. I want to be someone who makes their own life rather than is made by others, knowing well that that means that I am conscious of my aging and dying process. But that's what I choose because I really want to feel. I really want to live. And I know that feeling is not just feeling the good things, but if you feel, you have to feel everything. And that's terrifying for people to think that if I'm really alive, I'm really awake, I will feel everything powerfully. And so most people say I can't do that. It's too hard. And so they decide to stay alive, but will then numb themselves as much as possible with entertainment and or more powerfully certain kinds of drugs or alcohol or any ways of numbing themselves to really feeling. And yet we know that if we don't feel, we're not very alive. Um, and so I feel there's that constant struggle between wanting to really be alive and being afraid of being alive because it's such a difficult thing. But for myself, that's something that I bring into my daily life is a certain rituals of connecting with that reality of being of dying. And then the other part of that is connecting to ancestors so that when I feel that, I feel scared and I think, oh, life is terrifying. Life and death is terrifying. And then I remember my ancestors and I realize, oh, my grandmother went through this. She faced dying and she died. And my beautiful dog died and is now in some other form, I believe. And my father died, and all these ancestors went through this it's the same as I'm going through it now. And I feel like if I can connect to them, then I feel the power. I feel empowered, and I feel like I receive power to live through them, and that they are with me, and that I really I draw on their love and their strength, and I tell myself that I am not alone. I am with. They are with me right now, and I will listen to their voices. So I hear my grandmother often saying, um, "Get going." Like gambatte, like don't just yeah, don't be defeated by life. Don't let life defeat you in a sense. That keep going, and that's the best you can do is to keep feeling, to keep doing your best to be kind, uh, just doing your best to do what you can do with what you are given, and that's what your task is for this day. And I do that every day, and I remind myself that I am alive and that I have things that I can do, and then I tell myself to do them. So this is one of those things. I said, "Oh, I got to do this talk, sharing somehow this interview," and that's what I'll do my best at today.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Like, you said like I don't know, and then but from there, so you kind of share the secret of the transformation, and yeah, so I see like a existential, way of living kind of give us more powerful alive. And it's really, great to hear about like using like, getting the support from the ancestors, feeling the love and the support, and yeah, we can do that. We are not alone. So that's really very feeling safe, and feeling like we have a lot of connection with the ancestor and have a lot of power to help us. So yeah, it's really a great way, and I think thank you so much for sharing that secret with everyone, because yeah, people kind of like struggle with the transformation, but yeah, so yeah, based on what you talk, so everybody can think about transformation in a different way.
I've been feeling that a lot in Japan now too, as well, because I think there's a lot of I think my personal story to that I didn't tell was that I mentioned about the Catholic Church, and the one side of that is the death consciousness, but the other side is the love of Jesus, right? And the love of Jesus is taught to people as a kind of unconditional love, right? Jesus loved everyone, and that love was unconditional, and especially for those who are suffering, especially for the poor, especially for those in pain, especially of those who are not receiving justice from society. Jesus loved all of those people. That's the kind of love we're taught. Um, but what I rebelled against as a teenager was the church, which I felt was not teaching what Jesus really taught, but was just teaching something that kept the church alive as an institution. And so I rejected the whole thing. But I think what then I was searching for is I think all of us want to feel that unconditional love from somewhere. And often our parents are not the best source of that because we often have great difficulties with our parents. But I think I was searching for that. And I think I found that in a human form in my grandmother. And I think sometimes for some of us, we're lucky to find elders, mentors, grandparents who are more able to just see Arinomama,
Mhm.
and to accept us and to see you're good enough the way you are, and to give us that sense of feeling. But I think a lot of us are searching for that, and I think dogs, pets can sometimes. I know you're a cat person, and some cats are cats can do it. Some cats think they're the center of the universe, whereas a,
Yes.
a dog thinks that you're the center of the universe. And so, in my experience, a dog can give you that unconditional love as well. But I think that somehow we're searching for that, and that could be for many people who feel that religion is problematic for them in the sense of it creates certain conflicts, often related to the churches themselves, though, or the organizations that promote those. But I think we're often looking for that similar kind of unconditional love, that there's somehow the way we were taught was that Jesus protects you. We're always protected by Jesus. We're always with someone. There's always this angel, what they call the guardian angel, who is always there by our side protecting us because there's evil in the world. There's devils. And um, so I feel like that's something that we're all searching for as well, is that sense of connecting to something beyond ourselves and our own limitations as a human being, to something that is a mystery, and but we know gives us a certain kind of peacefulness, to feel that we are not alone. I think all of us suffer from this feeling that we are just alone in this tiny little, existence in this vast universe, and we're not somehow connected. And I think that's, how the importance of something like connecting with mindfulness to ourselves, and then helping us to realize the connection with others. And I think the what I'm feeling the most at this stage of my life is the need to connect to something that some people would call spiritual or religious, or but something that gives a power beyond ourselves. And I think that could be ancestors, but it could also be a religion. It could be some form of spirituality that and it could be nature for many people. But um, I'm feeling more the need for myself, but also for those who I work with, to feel that connection too, that would give them some strength to get through their lives.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I have been like supporting my clients and communities to grow like more like a nurturing figure inside. Because sometimes people cannot find those nurturing figure at the outside in the real world. And then like, because people want to feel like unconditional love, and then so when people want to feel like they're protected by somebody. So like you said, like it can be ancestor, can be like a great nature, can be dog or cat. So, but it's something like, it can be spiritual, but we need something like, make us feel very protected and feel safe and feel loved. So I kind of like talk about like a nurturing figure, not the real figure, but sometimes I use the Baymax, like a big
Oh,
white guy, like the animation. I don't know, the big Baymax.
no, no, no.
That's the comic, that's the character. So it's like a very white, big guy, and then so he is always like protecting somebody. So sometimes like when people don't have like those real figures, so it can be anything, can be nature, can be like virtual figure, or can be ancestor, but something make us feel safe and loved and protected.
I'm finding that I see more of this in the Japanese anime, so the animation,
Yes.
and they are very deliberately, I believe, the creators are trying to provide some kind of spirituality, I think, in the, specifically in Japan, but also I think in the world, in the face of a growing population that does not believe in a religion.
Mm.
And so providing something that can give us some kind of peace and comfort. So, for example, like Totoro.
Oh.
Totoro, this mythical creature who doesn't say anything, right? He can't even talk, but he appears by the side of these little girls who are having a really difficult time because their mother's in the hospital and they don't know, is mother going to come back home or not? And they're having a really hard time. And suddenly, at those darkest moments, like in the dark and by the bus stop, waiting in the dark and the rain, Totoro appears, and Totoro is simply provides that presence, right? I am here with you, and you are somehow protected from all the dangers in life. And I think all of us, need those kinds of figures in our life that um, and I think it's one of the biggest problems with our profession is that when we go through these counseling, clinical psychology, clinical social worker programs, they act as if religion and spirituality is something that we don't need to think about, right? And that it's too hard to kind of deal with our clients' spiritual concerns um, and yet that's what people are really concerned about, even if they can't express it. Many of their fears are and their behaviors are coming out of this need for something very deep, and yet in our attempt to be more scientific, we act as if those concerns are not important to deal with, or in reality, for us as clinicians, they're too difficult to deal with because it, again, as it requires, as I said, my mentors told me, you've got to develop your own character, right? You've got to be able to be with a person who is has stage 4 lung cancer and is telling you that this is what I'm going through right now. And you've got to be with somebody, a young teenager who is cutting their wrists because they're finding life so difficult. And you can't do that just by learning some kinds of methods, right? You've got to develop your own ability inside to be able to be present with somebody else, no matter what they're going through.
Yes, yes. Yeah, this is the time, so we really need some shift, like a kind of fundamental change for thinking about our well-being. So we pretty much talk about a lot of stuff about wellness, like a well-being. And then how we can move forward, maybe it's another story, we can continue talking. But I want to have, your advice, if people can really grow their inner well-being, so can have the like a true wellness. So how people can interact with their mental health? Because right now it's more a little bit more fixing model, and then when we have symptoms, so we get to, receive the help. But when people can grow like a inner well-being, so how it's gonna be mental health in the future?
Mental health in the future.
It's a little bigger picture, so I kind of want to know.
mm, I think the image I'm getting recently is kind of this. There's a Japanese expression, "bushi wa kuanedo takayoji,"
Hi.
which means that a samurai uses a toothpick even when they haven't eaten, right? And I that's been my life story in a sense that I wanted to embody that, and I wanted to always be autonomous, to be responsible for myself, not to depend on others. And yet, the negative side of that is that it's extremely difficult to always think you have to do it yourself. And um, I think that's one thing I'm feel like I'm learning very recently. I just told somebody who I reached out to for help, and I said, "Can you?" I'm learning to ask for help now, and I think that's something that all of us really need to do for our well-being. Is to, and this is the basis of so much support group help, self-help groups in the around the world, is that the need to first embrace your own vulnerability and to accept that I can't do it alone. I need help, and this is something that you see in so many forms today. The former Surgeon General of the United States, Murphy, when he retired a few months ago, he said that what we really need so desperately is community in this country, and that people need to be able to come together and to help and to both give and to receive, and how that was something that is so important in communities, and that people have become so isolated and trying to do it on their own, and removing themselves from society in so many ways and suffering for that, partly because the world is such a difficult place to be in. And I believe that that's part of the responsibility that I feel is to somehow be able to create those spaces, the places of, I think of the English word refuge, a place where people can feel shelter from the storm, a place where they both can give and receive, and they feel like that's what life is all about, is how to both be able to receive from others, and also to be able to give what you can to others. And um, it brings up the whole difficulty that I've had a course at Stanford called Transforming Self and Systems. And I've been telling students after many years, I've seen many students transform themselves. But I have found that the system is too hard. It's too hard to change. And I see these, activists after 4 years say, I realize I'm leaving Stanford. I fought with Stanford for 4 years to create change, and Stanford won. Stanford wins every time because Stanford has much more power than I do. The reality is, of course, they have had some effect on the system, and I have the same feeling. I feel like, Stanford won. Stanford's more powerful than me. But I did create these courses. I did create a whole wellness courses that still exist. I created these life courses about how to live a better life and all that. And so those do exist. But the reality is that the system is powerful. And, we're seeing that so much, even more dramatically in the US right now, in which we have people taking on an authoritarian kind of leadership and are limiting the rights of so many people. And we can often feel very helpless about how to react to that. And so every day I try to tell myself that what I can do is still important, and that even in these very small groups, we can still help ourselves to feel more empowered to take whatever actions that we can take. And I draw a lot of inspiration from figures like Grace Lee Boggs, who was an Asian American activist for many years until when she passed away at 100 years old. But her message was that we are the leaders that we are looking for, meaning that we as everyone can take responsibility now for doing whatever it is that we can, and continue to believe that there's meaning in even these small groups of people forming community, to keep the hope, keep the faith that there is something worthwhile to continue. And that's, especially important in communities which are very disadvantaged and don't have the same kinds of resources that others do. But there, it's still important to have gardens and to have communities, centers where we can continue to find strength in coming together.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like, past 14 years, I have been observing you creating the shelter in the different places, and now in Japan, not only US, and then I really see you, providing the space for everyone, like people can share their vulnerability and they feel safe. So yeah, so kind of like, observing you creating a lot of shelter in the different places. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and I think I hope like more people kind of like providing the space and creating the community for everyone. So I can talk with you forever, but so I noticed that it's almost the time right now. But do you have like any message for everyone or any announcement about your work? Do you have?
Well, there was a politician who served the people of Harlem for many years, named Adam Clayton Powell, and he had a saying, "Keep the faith, baby." And I really like that sense of, somehow we've got to keep the faith, right? We've got to keep hope and I think there's also the last thing maybe is to share the Japanese expression yoroshiku onegai shimasu, which to me is a way of saying that of asking for help and saying acknowledging that I can't do it alone. Uh, Please help and please connect with me. And that's something that an expression I think um, I go by, and I think it's good for Americans if they could learn that kind of an expression as well, how to ask others that connection. Mm.
Thank you so much. I will ask you for help next time. I always do, but thank you so much.
Yes.
Yes, I really appreciate. And then Stephen has a website and the social media, so please like everybody follow Stephen and learn about heartfulness the more. He has been very, very actively working in both US and Japan, so please like follow Stephen. So thank you so much for Stephen-san. Okay, bye,
Bye.
bye.